Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Study Session meeting for Monday, November 8th, 2021. I want to thank all the commissioners for your service this evening, and I recognize a new face. So Sarupa, would you introduce?
So, Commission, we have our new senior planner, Christopher Webb.
Ah.
Today is his first day, first meeting with Farmers Branch. He comes from city of Waxahachie. He has been a planner there for about 3.5 years. Recently promoted to their senior planner position. But he lives nearby. He lives in Carrollton. So we saved him from a lot of driving.
What is that drive to Waxahachie?
Hour to an hour 15.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Got a little-
I'm really excited to have him on board. He'd be a very good addition to our team, and I'm looking forward to offloading some of my.
Looking forward to taking it on. So,
Give us your name again.
Chris Webb,
Welcome, Chris. Glad
Thank you.
you're here.
happy to be here.
So we're going to jump right into the study session agenda with item A1, discuss regular agenda items. That bumps us over to C1, consider approval of the attendance matrix for the Planning and Zoning Commission as presented and take appropriate action. Any comments, concerns, questions about the attendance matrix?
It's always a great matrix.
Everyone seems to approve of that, so we'll move on to C2. Consider approval of the October 25th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Any comments about the minutes? All right, minutes seem to be in order. That leads us to the public hearings. There's 3 public hearings tonight. Item D1, conduct a public hearing and consider a request to adopt a multifamily development policy amending the City of Farmers Branch. Actually, I'm going to jump to D2 and D3, and we're going to come back to D1. We'll end with that. D2, conduct a public hearing and consider the request to amend Plan Development District PD 53, including but not limited to the amount and location of allowable signage on approximately 12.20 acres of land described as Lot 1 and 2, Block B, Dallas Parkway International Place Addition 2, and Lot 1, Block A, International Place Addition 1, and take appropriate action. Sarupa, are you presenting this?
Yes.
All right.
So this one is PD 53 amendment for signage only. When we go through the presentation, you will see PD 53 that plan development only applies to the properties around International, which is commonly known as the International Plaza, the 3 office building and the parking garage. So it only affects that development, the signage amendment that is being requested. It is triggered by a major employer deciding to move or relocate to the city, and they would really like to have the visibility of their signage or their name, basically their brand. And the way the PD is written right now, it's very restrictive in terms of signage amount as well as location of signage. So the building they're trying to locate to is the Trinity Industries building, where the building is parallel to D&T, and it's a little bit set back from the highway. So when you're driving, you can't really see the signage unless like it's towards the top half of the building. But the PD 53 restricts the signage to the top brow, which is within like 20 feet from the top of the roof plate, and then and the bottom brow, which is about 45 feet. And I have the numbers in the staff report. But in the middle portion, no signage is allowed. So this amendment is basically going to let them add a 3rd signage on that middle section of the elevation. So that's all this amendment is doing. It's adding 1 signage on that facade that faces the D&T freeway, and also adding expanding the maximum allowable square footage. Right now, it's 2 signs only on that facade, and maximum is 500 square feet. This one would extend that to another 200, which is total going to be 700 square feet. And the top brow portion, if you notice, they already have Trinity Industries in the top brow location. So they cannot, or they're not allowed to locate in that same band. So that's what we are processing this amendment for. The good thing is it's only for that PD and it only impacts that office complex. It does not impact anyone else.
So, Mr. Chair, I had a couple of questions. What's the reasoning behind having the signage ordinance for that planned development zone?
That was when the PD was adopted. They probably
Okay.
wanted to have some restriction from an aesthetic standpoint.
Okay.
Whoever was the building owner, I mean, of course, whoever did the PD 53 at that time, that was a cohesive understanding that, okay, there are 3 office buildings, we are gonna limit signage to only 2 elevations, and on each elevation, only 2 signage allowed, and on the top and bottom. Probably trying to keep that glass facade free and clear.
Okay.
Maybe that was the thought process. Now, of course, I don't know exactly
Sure.
what was the reasoning, but that probably was the thought process.
Also, 20 years ago, the tollway was not necessarily
I
the
was gonna
height
say.
that it is
The major,
now.
yeah.
Okay.
So, probably the group at that point said, oh, yeah, that makes sense, low and high,
Okay.
and the tollway is at street level.
And then-
Now it suddenly, has bridges and all those things.
It's become quite the
Yeah.
the thoroughfare. The second question then is there any kind, other than just our feelings today and city council's feelings later on, or wait, we're the final body on an SUP? I forget.
No, it would go to city council
Okay.
because this is a zoning amendment.
I'm sorry, yes. Are there any criteria that we're gonna be measuring this by? Because what's to stop CB Richard Ellis, the competitor to Cushman Wakefield, wanting to move in on the floor underneath and saying, hey, we want a sign now, and since we're a multi-million-dollar company moving to Farmers Branch, we should have our sign too. Are there any criteria we're going off of, or just,
Right, I thought the same thing, yeah.
You mean, are you asking, can there be 4, now 5, now 6 signs, and it just becomes junky? So, after this headquarters comes in.
Okay.
This isn't a fail-safe, but they're probably gonna come with this. And then there's a third headquarters that's a little bit smaller, but the low-brow sign's already allowed, and they can go there, and they're fine with that.
Okay.
The building will be 100% leased up, and they will be locked in for 15 years. So at least we have 15 years that you have 3 headquarters. Originally, I think it was like this because JP Morgan Chase had almost all of those 3 buildings. So they did not need more than 1 sign, because it was 1 tenant, incredibly large. It looks like Rockefeller Center at Christmas down there. It's beautiful. So I think that's another reason why you don't have a lot of signage authority, because they didn't need it. But we're gonna be leased up. for
so what
this
you're
asset.
telling me is it's gonna be my son's problem and not mine?
In 15 years, you can still have 3 allowed,
Okay.
but you can't have 4.
It'll be my daughter's problem, that's when she turns 18.
But
All
the
right.
thing is, also another thing, good point that Alison mentioned is that the 3 signs, it cannot go more than the 3. And the maximum amount, we are limiting it to 700, which right now it's already allowed 500, so we are not getting more than another 200. And say 15 years down the road, once this major employer decides to leave, whoever comes in or that space hopefully stays leased,
Mhm.
they should be able to use that same amount of signage, the area,
Okay.
at that point,
If they want.
if they want to.
It's a negotiation with the landlord too, so you have to pay for it too. So,
Well, Cushman and Wakefield, I know they can pay for it.
yes, they can, yes, they're the brokers, they'll be here tonight.
Cool.
So to Eddie's point though, the standard, so the other PDs that are there, it looks like there's a PD for every major building that's right there along the tollway, or more or less, or a group of buildings that's the same development. Do we keep maybe, like, so if a building just down the tollway says, hey, I'm in PD 95, I want to do this, so I saw these guys do that. I guess we can't say no, right? And then that goes back to what
Well,
Andy said.
you-
So is this the standard we should probably remember and
Yeah,
archive?
SUP's, my understanding is, it's doing exactly what it was created to do. The city fathers decided, let's do PDs, and let's have a whole lot of them, because
Right.
that's the way we can manage the land use.
Yeah.
And then we'll have rules on those PDs, and then the way that you amend those rules, or go ask permission, is by doing an SUP. So,
David, this one is a zoning amendment, so they are not asking for an SUP, that one is the next one. So this one, to get back to the standard question.
Changing the zoning.
The PDs usually don't always have signage requirements. Now, this one was a bit unusual. We have all these 10,000 PDs, right? Not all of them come with their own signage requirements. Most of them will basically tell you like whatever is the city's base sign code, that's what you are gonna be allowed to. And city's base sign code for wall sign is 10% of the facade, which this is a tall building, you'll probably get even more if you go by the city's base sign code. Another unusual characteristics for this PD is the fact that it's very restrictive. It specifically says that staff cannot process a variance or any kind of exception to what is allowed for signage. Whereas many PDs exist in the city where there is a established process for processing exceptions or variances, if there is a signage requirement that they want to change, or if there is some other standard in the PD that the applicant would like to change. Here, in this particular PD, there was no process listed. It was just black and white. Either you do it or you don't. That's why we are, in a way, forced to amend the PD in itself. For the other PDs that are nearby, they might not have signage standard, and then they fall back to the city's basic sign code. So that's where we have to compare kind of apple to apple. This one was geared by the major employer who is about to bring like 300 jobs.
Right.
And also we did review the signage in terms of whether it's gonna, like, if they were gonna come and tell us, well, we're gonna cover the whole building front or almost like 50% of it. Of course, that would have been something we wouldn't support. But this was something that was in line with, okay, they were allowed 500 square feet, now we are only expanding it another 200 square feet. So it's not too much from what is right now allowed. We are also restricting it to just that one additional signage. So they are not gonna be allowed to add more signage on the other facades of the building. Whatever is there, it stays unchanged. So that's the criteria we are following here. We are trying to just accommodate that one request through this amendment. if you
But we
will.
should probably keep in mind, if she sells more headquarters coming Farmers Branch, which we all want, like, okay, we're probably gonna need to stay somewhat standard.
Well, I think it's a huge employer, which is a good thing. But, so, where this is placed on the building, what does this cover up? Is that interstate battery behind that, on that floor, or?
Yes.
Okay. And will it be blocked out? How does that work?
I really don't know, probably a little bit, but they want it.
They want it, yeah. So, okay.
And there's 3 signs on other buildings up and down the tollway, it's just this building didn't allow it. Because the 2000.
In this configuration? Okay.
Yeah, the Providence Tower with the hole in the middle at Spring Valley, they have 3 signs, Copart, and, you know, you used to have Coca-Cola and Dallas North Bank. I mean, you'll see 3 signs
Bank,
elsewhere,
yeah.
but this one just didn't allow it. And it had one single tenant, which is very unusual for a large campus.
Well, I don't know where they're gonna get interstate batteries in place of, right there with Trinity Industries. They take up the whole side.
Well, Trinity has the top route, and they have
Yeah.
exclusive rights to the entire top, and no one else can go up there. That's why
Okay,
Interstate had
got it.
to go in the
Okay,
middle.
in the middle.
And are they only getting one floor? They're probably getting more than
They're getting
one.
multiple, because
They're
it's
getting
several
multiple
hundred
floors,
people.
and that
It's
sign is
400
only
people.
3 feet deep. So it's not necessarily gonna cover the whole
Oh, yeah, it's
floor.
not gonna,
just 3 feet
you can
deep.
see past it.
Okay.
And
Any
what's the-
more questions?
Yeah, just the top and bottom are fabricated aluminum, and the middle one is linear facelit. Is that just, was that their request that they wanted a linear facelit, and what's the difference between those?
I actually do not know the technical difference between, that's what they requested
That's what they
for the
requested, so
sign.
that's what they.
And I requested they would copy Trinity Industries lettering and materials, so it would look like uniform. And so when it's lit, it looks like Trinity. When it's lit, it's white.
Right.
The Trinity sign is white when it's lit, and then when Trinity sign is off, it's dark. And so they were showing it when it was lit, so, but it will be uniform with the sign above it.
Same colors? Because it is a
Yes.
different material. One says fabricated aluminum, the other says linear facelit, so it would seem like it'd be different.
I know they had options, they'll be there tonight and they can discuss it, but I just asked them to match the materials from the sign above.
Any more questions on this one? All right. That takes us to D3, conduct a public hearing and consider the request for a specific use permit amendment for on-premise sale consumption of alcoholic beverages within a qualifying restaurant or facility for an approximate 6.85 acre property located at 14221 Dallas Parkway, and take appropriate action.
Thank you, Chairman Moore. I would like to give some clarification because I'm sure you all remember we just
just
looked
did
at
it.
it last meeting.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to bring this back is not because they were doing something wrong or anything. We just wanted it to be very clear Right now with their TABC, and this came up after the meeting when I was talking to Reagan, the chef who was present that night. Even though by their TABC permit, right now they are serving from that existing restaurant, someone could pick up like an open glass of wine or beer and walk to the lobby. There are multiple sitting areas, and that's why I went and took some pictures. They have a beautiful building. I mean, this was the first time I went in that building. And if you haven't, I would encourage if you guys want to just stop by and see. It's a really beautiful campus. And inside the building, there are several sitting areas. And what she felt is that it should be clarified that even though the SUP exhibit did not show the whole sitting area under their current TABC permit, someone can take that container and sit in a lounge area in that ground floor. And we felt that that should be clarified to the commission also, because last time when we looked at it, was just the bar area. That's how the original SUP was presented to us. So another question came up after the P&Z meeting at the department head internal staff meeting, is that lake house building. If you remember, I think one of you asked Reagan about the catering permit, that they do pull catering permit, and if the group that they will be serving, say in that lake house building, do ask for alcohol, they can, under their catering permit, serve alcohol to the lake house building. So legally, they are still okay because the SUP does tie it to the whole lot. It does not tie it to that particular restaurant because technically it does not really have a boundary. But we wanted the commission in full transparency to understand the scope of the project. That besides the hours of operation, this is where they can serve alcohol with a catering permit and also their current TABC permit. And I have added quite a few photos. So the lake house building, you can see it sits on that property and it backs up to the freeway service road. There are some outdoor seating areas, there are indoor seating areas in that ground floor. It's very beautifully done. But again, nothing is wrong with the application, but we wanted all of you to know.
Well, I think that's a good clarification, because I think that when the presentation was done, I wondered why they didn't include all of that. Because to me, it would be something you would want to do. You would want to be able to go to these places, sit out in the back, because you could tell that was an outdoor seating area, or we discussed going in, to some of these areas. So thank you for that. I think it's a better situation.
Yeah, because technically the bar where they sell, that's still limited to that small cafe. That's where they sell the alcohol from. But
Yeah.
you or I or whoever
You could carry it out.
can carry it and
Yeah.
just sit in the lounge area.
Sure. Very nice. Good
If
pictures.
we hadn't got this right, would there be a code enforcement officer like slapping people's hands on the way out? Like, no, you can't take that.
Get in there.
Can I have that job if there is?
I like things to be much more transparent in here, so it
No.
wasn't trying to fix something.
No, this is
It was
wonderful.
trying to be.
You're right, it's not enforceable.
Any more questions on this one? All right, back to D1.
Oh, my.
D1, conduct a public hearing and consider a request to adopt a multifamily development policy amending the City of Farmers Branch comprehensive plans, which provides direction regarding new multifamily development within the city, including but not limited to guiding site layout, building location, density, open space, and building design, and take appropriate action. So I guess I'll give a little bit of history on this because it's touched everyone in the room. It started in 2019 where council directed staff to develop a multifamily policy. And then since then, as various multifamily cases have come before council, there's been a variety of directions given, all the way from no more multifamily, period, to, oh, well, no, that one's okay, and then there was discussion amongst the commission about how do we slow down the multifamily? Is there a way to manage that? And the answer was yes, through this policy. There's certain things you can do. For example, if you require air-conditioned corridors and hallways, then that costs the developer more, and usually when it costs more, that may slow things down. Or if you required structure parking, that's 3 times more than surface parking, that would slow it down. And so staff's been working on this, and then many of you recall we had our joint council and P&Z meeting back in July, maybe? And at that time, there was a presentation about this, and we kind of went around the room, and there was lots of conversation at that time about density, density per, I don't know, all different kinds of densities, and how it's different when you're maybe up next to the Dallas North Tollway compared to an urban area, compared to the west side or whatever. So staff, and specifically Kira, has been working on this project pretty much the whole time, and sort of gathering all the data and information, and now this is back before us. So I know when I had my pre-meeting with Sarupa, I was kind of like, oh, wow, this is done. But then as I thought about it, it's been a 2-year process with a pandemic in between where we didn't meet for a while. Certainly we didn't discuss this. And so now they're ready to lay this before us. So Kira, do you want to give us maybe just an overview?
Yeah, I can give you a quick overview. I will give a presentation at the public hearing in the main portion of the meeting. But the chairman, first I'll introduce myself, Kira McCardle, consultant to the planning department. And Chairman Moore, that was a great overview. I would say that yes, this policy is a result of council direction that was received. What we are trying to do in this policy is provide more direction for a number of users of this plan. It'll be used by staff, developers, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and council themselves when we're considering new applications for multifamily development in Farmers Branch. And what we're really trying to do is provide some information as to what the city wants to see in terms of high-quality multifamily development. Some of our existing comprehensive plans, such as the Central Area Plan and the East Side Plan, they do make reference to high-quality multifamily development, but there is no guidance as to what exactly that was. So what this policy will do, by touching on a number of topics from site design and building orientation and physical building design, is it will provide us with sort of a bar by which to assess applications that do come into us. And this will be used as a tool to evaluate applications and the staff recommendation, and ultimately your recommendation and council's decision that they make on multifamily developments within the city.
Super. So I guess probably the best way to do this, we've set aside about 45 to 50 minutes to go through this. So I think maybe a roll call is a good way to start, because that way maybe as we go down the line, others' questions will be answered. So I'm going to start to my right with Commissioner Bertle, and then we'll just go around the room and ask your questions. Fire away.
Okay, so I actually read all of this, and it was good, so you did a great job on that part. So, but I do have several questions, because I know that we do have, like on sustainable neighborhoods, that term is used, and so also is attainable. But some of my questions are, as I'm reading through, and I've got 3 pages of stuff, and I won't go through all of these, but
Pass them to me, I'll do the rest.
okay. But so it talks about 45 per acre, 55 per acre, 65 per acre, 80 per acre. And so I'm wondering, is that going to change our height of what we're talking about? What does that look like? Is that reducing the size of the units? And so that's something that I considered and talking about. Plus, we say high quality, and I know that the state of Texas limits us on a lot of our choices. So this is also something that came up in my head. What do we mean by high quality? And I know we list materials. I do agree with the developers' responses, by the way. I think that was a great idea to submit those to the developers for a response back. And then another question was, can we make it different for north side, east side, west side, whatever? Can we make, or does everything have to be the same on this? Like on the east side, can we make it different and have parking garages, structure versus on the west side where we would really, maybe restrict that a little bit? And we discussed that kind of before the meeting started. We have apartments on the west side, there around the station area that are not using the structured parking that we built. We have 4-story structured parking and they're not using level 4 and maybe level 3. And they're parking on the street. And so I think those are, and then my last one was, I hope that in landscaping, as I've driven around and I discussed this last time, with landscaping requirements, I know that there are better choices for landscaping requirements, or from us, what our landscaping list is around apartment buildings. They're putting in live oaks in front yards of these little mini things, and those, they cannot grow. In a few years, they will have to be cut down because they will not survive. And so I think that we need to look at that very closely on our suggestions or requirements or whatever, so that, I'm going to use the word sustainable, that planting that we do is sustainable, and what we're going to require on things like that. So all of my stuff right there, 3 pages. Boom, boom.
Kira?
Okay, I'll try and pick those off. I've made a couple notes. If I missed something, please let me know and I can circle back to it. So first, your first question was related to density. So you may have noticed since July 12th, your joint meeting between P&Z and Council, the policies on density have changed within the plan. So the plan that was presented on July 12th presented a range of densities for most of the city, for the whole city, between 45 and 80 units per acre. What we've done, based on direction that was received from P&Z and Council since that date and is in this proposed version, is we have increased I'll call it the blanket density across most of the city to 55 units per acre. And there's now just a minimum. So what that does, there's no maximum density. So now what that does is it had, based on Council and P&Z direction that they would like to see a bit more density, that has increased the minimum level. Now, what I would like to say to that is this minimum level is consistent with applications that we're currently getting within the city. So it's not like we're pushing the bar saying we want to see density that it is far above the density that we're seeing buildings come in at now. For instance, the the Mustang Station, I believe, is around the 70 to 80 units per acre, depending on what phase you're looking at. So 55 units per acre is not a leap by any means. It's consistent with what we're seeing in the city right now. And then as per Council and P&Z direction, we did also provide an increased density around the highways of 65 units per acre. So again, that's not inconsistent with the applications that we're seeing. We would expect to see probably higher densities adjacent to the highways, but we've added in sort of that minimum bar. In terms of area variation, that is something that is possible for us to do. And the plan does talk about sort of things, any application needs to be site specific and appropriate within the context within which it's set. So like I said, on the east side, a site may be able to handle more density. And we have put in that minimum bar of 55 units per acre in the plan. But as I said, this will be a tool that will be used by staff and the developer through discussions. It doesn't mean a developer can come in on the east side and say, and put in an application for 55 units per acre. But at that point, staff may have a discussion with the developer and say, if you look at your site, we think your site could possibly handle more density. And would have that discussion at that time. In addition to that, this is an amendment to the city's comprehensive plans. So if there was and the comprehensive plans will supersede this plan where there may be a conflict. But if there was a specific area where we wanted to see a significantly increased amount of density and have specific direction towards it, that comprehensive plan may be the best place for that direction to be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, except that I wrote a note here. So let's say you go from 45 to 80. What is lost or what is added or whatever to get that? That's double. So what do we add or what have we lost on that density?
Well, it could be a number of things. So to add more density, you could, and you mentioned some of them, you could add more stories to the building, so it may be a higher building. You could also, as you said, the units could also change in variety and type and size within the building itself. Those would be the main things. We still do have our requirements related to the amount of open space per dwelling unit. So we aren't losing out on those amenities or that open space. And the parking requirements would still be linked to the comprehensive zoning parking requirements for what would be required for the site. So mostly the change that you would see would be either in the type and style of units or the height of the building.
And if I may add something to that, Kira, the number that is kind of feels like too big at this point, if I'm assuming it correctly, what your question about like 45 to 80. So I think some of that basic minimum that we came up with, the 55, some of that research was done, if you recall, staff processed a density amendment, purely density amendment for the station area. And for PD 86 only. That was a zoning amendment last year. And the reason we did that, or when we did that work, staff researched all the existing multifamily projects that are either entitled or on ground.
For us.
For Farmers Branch
Okay,
only.
yeah.
And we were actually surprised to see that a lot higher density projects were coming towards the east side, like many of the new projects, including the station area projects where the multifamily were already pretty high in density. One of the goals, if you notice in the multifamily policy, was we were trying to get away from the garden style apartments. We were trying to get into more structured parking, because how we bring in that quality, how we bring in that dollar amount, or how we bring in the type of development we are looking for. One of the way to go there is by density. Also, the reason behind the big push for getting this policy adopted as soon as possible, right now we have almost 3 projects that are waiting to be submitted.
Right.
And actually, there are some that we have had like pre-development meetings with the applicants where they're looking at densities sometimes near about like 90. So not that we are gonna encourage that, but at least having that 55 minimum gives them the room to ask for more and justify that request that, hey, we are still providing the amount of open space that you were recommending. We are still not like building every bit of grass on the site, but we feel that this site can support the density. We have a market for that. So that's how we will, as staff level, will review any new multifamily projects coming in. For 55, the number, just to pick on the number, one of the reasons we felt that number made sense is right now, PD 86 has that 55 minimum density
Which one is
requirement.
PD 86?
The station area. The density amendment we did, we only established the minimum density of 55. So also from a usability standpoint, we felt it's consistent across the board. That way people are not going back and forth when looking at, okay, you have a policy that says 45 to 80. We have a zoning that actually requires 55 minimum. And then we are looking at freeways, which are gonna be again 65. There's too many numbers to play with.
Correct, I agree. Okay, so do we do a study as to what is the density that, the size and the whatever that sells on an apartment? Do we know that number?
Isn't that what the developer does? They're coming to
Yes.
us.
Do they do that number
Oh,
and
yeah.
present that?
They know.
Okay,
They already know.
good, okay. You didn't address the landscaping,
Landscaping, yeah.
but we can do that at another time. Let someone else go.
On the landscaping though, I
Yep.
know we did put it on the back burner, the citywide landscaping ordinance. And those were some of the places where we were gonna address the species question. And we can always make those requirements or recommendations when a project comes to us, just like we did that last townhome project.
Yeah, but by the time they submit to us, they've already got all this stuff already lined out. And what's happening is that they're just going to our list, I think. Until we get that done, we're in jeopardy of having, live oaks planted in little mini yards, and they're gonna be gone, and, we won't be able to sustain that. They're not gonna go back in there and plant a tree, I don't think, after that's already done, and they cut it down, or they cut it back, or it's misshapen, or we've got it under a power line, or whatever. So I think it's really imperative that we really look at that before we let them say, yeah, this is what, or change that planning, and maybe get that done quickly. Thank you.
So to pick up directly where Commissioner Bertle left off, I am the proud owner of a 500-square-foot front yard with 2 live oak trees in it. One of them is already dead, to which I'm going to have to remove. But my builder went to I live in Mercer Crossing, so this is this magical
PD
new.
was
Yeah.
way overexcited with trees.
Right.
Even we agree on that.
So perhaps this is a larger issue that we should address outside of the multifamily policy, but
Yeah, and
definitely
that's
something
why
we
I said
should.
we have to go back to the landscape ordinance of the section of the
Right, change it,
CZO. It has much broader impact versus just multifamily.
I'm thinking
policy.
desert landscape. It's much more aqua-friendly. I would like some cactus. No, my only thing with the multifamily thing is that I just want to make sure, what are we doing to dovetail with the city's efforts on attainable housing, either in this policy or in another policy? I'm going to beat that drum until it loses sound, but that's my number one thing. And now the live oaks.
So that is the second project that's on Kira's list. I mean, she has been incredible working. Do you want to guess what time it's there?
Well,
I'm kidding.
I'd like to know where you are first.
Oh, you didn't know?
No.
I'm in Baku, Azerbaijan.
Oh, okay. Well, we should hang up with you and let you go out.
No, I was just feeling like. So that is the second project on her list. We wanted to get, this is a top priority because, as I said, there are so many multifamily projects waiting. Attainable housing, that discussion is such a big, broad topic. It needs the time and research. It needs the due attention. Rather than sticking like a small paragraph in a multifamily policy does not do it justice.
Sure.
That's why we split it, and she's gonna do, or she's planning to do, I don't want to put it on you, but she's planning to do a study session presentation to City Council
Okay.
pretty soon, before the end of the year, hopefully. And that's where we will present different options, like what we currently do, what can be done. And multifamily, the way we see it, is it's one of the tools in the tool chest, as Kira likes to say it, that there are several ways to get to the point where we want to go. It can be done through multifamily, like requiring a percentage of it. It can be done through attached single-family products, duplexes. There are several ways.
Sure.
ADUs, that's already part of our work plan. But that requires a much bigger and broader look and an in-depth research.
Sure,
We don't want to shortchange it as part of the multifamily.
Right, just the concern on the timing, though, is that you say we've got 3 multifamily housing projects that are pending, and we're gonna be working on the attainable housing policy. Next, there's a balance between, well, if we have 5 projects we've already approved, doesn't it, what change can we make if we're putting all this through the hopper before we get the policy?
The way we
So-
see it is, the timing question to it, even if we get the multifamily policy adopted, which is a priority for the projects that are waiting in the pipeline, we do not preclude it. What that means is when we bring back the attainable housing policy, it can still have a component for multifamily projects that, okay, if we are recommending this and if council agrees to it, then so such and such percentage has to be, something. I don't know
Sure.
what that is.
Okay.
But it does not preclude, just because we are processing the multifamily policy, doesn't mean that in future, we won't be able to introduce some techniques of getting attainable housing as part of multifamily projects.
Okay, thank you.
But it is, we haven't put it on back burner. It is in the pipeline.
Rock solid, thank you.
Next.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the density issue.
I thought you were gonna say live oaks.
Yeah, well, you two can handle that. Did I understand correctly that there's no maximum density? We're not setting any maximum density? Okay. And
There's
then
not.
the other question, sorry?
I just confirmed there is not a maximum density
okay.
in the policy.
And how do we derive 65 for those areas near highways?
It was
As opposed to 75 or? 90 or?
So the maximum we had seen, I think when she does the presentation, there is a table that she included for the existing multifamily projects in the city. And you'll see the range is somewhere around, like, if you look at the west side, the older apartment complexes, they had the 45 to 50 kind of range. And as you go towards the east side, the newer ones, they go all the way up to like 70, 80. So that 65 was, I believe, to be kind of the midpoint.
Yeah, like I said, we are putting it, the 65 is a minimum. We didn't want to do something that's inconsistent with things that are out there, or present a bar, or put a bar in place that was incredibly high, and we would be scaring off new development, or putting something burdensome in place. In all honesty, I would expect that in those locations, we would easily see proposals that would be higher than that. But we just wanted to say that, put that bar in place for where we don't want to see something lower than that. Putting something less than 65 units per acre in place might not be the best and highest use for the land. And we just wanted, so we set that bar, because it was sort of a midpoint or a reasonable place to put it, given what we've seen in the city up to this point.
And then just one more follow-up, and that is, so we're considering a 55 across the board around the city? No east side, west side, other areas?
Yeah.
Geo.
So, great job putting this together. I think probably a lot of time and effort went into it, Kira.
Absolutely.
So, excellent work. I don't want to beat a dead horse with the densities. I thought we might have been a little too low on the densities. I felt like we could have maybe pushed the envelope a little bit, gone a little bit higher. But the one item I do want to talk about is open space. So I feel like we're kind of working against density when we started to require open space. And I feel like we're being a little bit restrictive with the developers demanding X amount of square feet for their development, where I would think that the developers know their business better than we do. I think the developers know that amenities sell a property, so they're definitely gonna be incentivized already to provide a feature, whether it be open space or any other features that they have in their communities. So I just wanted to bring up that I felt that the 150 square feet per unit may be something we wanna revisit as a group or staff, or however you guys, or how did you guys get to 150 square feet? Like, what was the determining factor that was the right number? I think we talked a little bit about this during the study session, or the council meeting that we did. And I think the number was the same then as it's being presented today, and I feel like that's something I think we should reevaluate. You're taking away square footage from potential units you're trying to add, so it's give and take. I'm not advocating against open space, but if we're pushing density, we gotta trust that the developers know their business and they know what they're gonna bring us to the table. We also have the opportunity during the SUP or the site plan reviews where we can actually make those type of recommendations. I know at that point it's more of a recommendation than a criteria, but I think there's still opportunity to have those discussions with the developers once we get far along in the process.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we did get to, we landed on the 150 square feet. It was really through a lot of research that we did. So when we were putting together this policy, we looked at other similar policies in a number of locations in Texas and outside. And that was really sort of we did see numbers that were higher than that. And numbers that were lower than that as well, but mostly I would say on the higher end. So we found the number through looking at that, and also through looking at developments within Farmers Branch and what they were meeting for the amount of open space, and this seemed to be a fair sort of midpoint for it. So I would say that we do put in that bar. I would also say that, I mean, it is a policy, so if the developer does have a rationale for why they can't meet it, or they're close to it but can't quite meet it, the space, there is still that space for it to be below that number, should a developer have a reason or a rationale for why it isn't quite at that 150 square feet per dwelling unit.
So Commissioner, I'm sorry, just real quick. So she kind of just answered my question and proved my point. So if developers are already coming to the table with 150 square foot minimum, why are we making this a criteria? That's where I'm coming from. I don't want to be restrictive with the developer. So you kind of just walked us through how you got to your number, which that makes sense and the logic that you put behind it. But if they did it on their own, why are we trying to make this a criteria?
So I guess if I want to answer that, kind of, for those developers who aren't coming on board or coming to the table with the minimum open space, how would we address those? Do we have anything in the books that help us address that? For example, PD 86, the station area PD, we talked about the density. It does have an open space requirement for the zoning. It says 15% of contiguous open space. So for those projects where there aren't any open space requirement in the books, this helps us to start the conversation with the applicant that, okay, this is what is recommended. If you are not meeting the 150 square feet per dwelling unit, if you are maybe meeting 130, I don't know what that magic number is. But as Kira is saying, at that time, we had some ground to have that conversation and say that, okay, give us the reasoning, how are you providing that amenity to your residents? Because we cannot guarantee that there won't be an applicant who would come in with zero open space to maximize the full lot. And at that point, as the government entity, we also have a responsibility to make sure that the future residents of that community have some form of open space or usable open space at their disposal.
I can agree with that. I would just think that the number should be lower in terms of the threshold to have that discussion. But I understand what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I just think that there's opportunity to lower the number.
So those that are higher, that have higher, that may have been the requirement of that particular, do we only do Farmers Branch? If we go into other areas, they may have required more. So that may be a
I
why.
think that's what she was saying, like she pulled
Yeah.
other locations, and some had higher, some had
So
lower.
it may not have been the developer's decision, it may have been the community's decision as to their policy, is what I was thinking. But anyway,
Thank you, Jill.
thank you.
Sure, I guess question to start off, what is the density of Mustang Station?
I think it's 80-something. Do you want to pull up?
Okay.
I think she has it.
Okay, so just kind of related to the open space, but Mustang Station is a very pet-friendly place. And so go there, certainly certain times of day, you'll find dog owners out in the neighborhood with their dogs taking care of business because there's not really anywhere on the property to do that. So I wonder at certain density levels, is that something that they should consider? I'm not suggesting that it's in here, but, because otherwise you're just simply pushing the problem outside the boundary. Second is downward casting light. Is this written that it just says we would love for you to minimize call it light pollution, or is it a should? I mean, are we telling them that they should do that unless that they must do it, or is it just simply we would love for you to if you do?
That's, I think I'll leave that to Kira to explain because it's a much bigger policy consideration. Like all the things you saw in the policy, do you want to go over the code requirement versus a policy recommendation? Like where it's a should versus
Right.
we would recommend?
Yeah, so your first question about Mustang Station, so phase one is 82.6 dwelling units per acre, and phase two is 71, roughly, rounding up at slightly, units per acre. And again, in terms of those amenity or areas for pets, I mean, that can be part of that open space requirement. So those types of amenities, you do see many buildings, multifamily buildings. I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area that will have sort of, a dog run or something of that nature on site. And that would count towards that 150 square feet per dwelling unit that is required within the policy. And then in terms of, you were asking about lighting, and the different language that's used in the plan. So you will see, if we do go over this in section 1, how to use the plan, and this is quite consistent. Planners get very used to this language, but when the word shall is used, that's a very strong word within a policy document. That means that essentially, at a policy level, of course, council can always vary policy within its own decisions, but staff is considering it a requirement. So that bar must be met. So it's a very strong word within policy. Where you see should or may or encourage, those are words that are used where staff and the city would really like to see that implemented, and that is definitely our preference. However, if there's a rationale for why it can't, and we do talk about that in section 1 as well. Every site is different, and this policy does recognize that. There may be cases where some policies are impossible or impractical to implement on a site. And that language sort of recognizes that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I think it's a should in here right now.
It's a should in here.
Yeah,
It is
so
in
it does
location-
answer my question, yes, thank you. And then one final, it's pronounced CPTED, it's Crime Prevention Through
Crime
Environmental
Prevention.
Design. It's just sort of quickly mentioned in relation to parking, but it seems to be a very comprehensive resource for design overall. And I'm just wondering, to what degree is there an opportunity there, if we understood all of those recommendations, are there other things that could be in here as well? And I was just wondering why it was only in reference to parking,
Actually, if the city is currently also working with the Code Enforcement Division for a multifamily security policy. So that was one of the reasons we did not want to do the deep dive into the multifamily policy, that we are looking at it more from a land use and a zoning standpoint. And parking is something which is almost like a zoning function that we do control in planning, whereas the security aspect of it, there is a much bigger effort that is underway. I know our code enforcement manager, Leo, he has started working on it this fiscal year. And I will bring that back to you guys as an update when that is ready. But they are looking at cameras, lighting, alarm, all that comes as a package for security and specifically for multifamily. So that is the reason we did not want to get into too much detail into our policy.
And I think Farmers Branch Police Department and their security people have offered their assistance to oversee any plans or suggestions or whatever, because they deal with that every day in apartments and in security in apartments.
Amber.
Well, firstly, just thank you again, Kara. Amazing work here. I want to specifically point out in the mixed-use developments, the flexibility for residential converting into retail or other uses, which is I consider a best practice policy, so kudos on that. I also appreciate the discussion on density, and I'm very much in favor of there not being a maximum density and allowing some market decisions there. However, I will disagree slightly with my council member about the open space, considering especially coming from this APA conference where I went on a big tour of various transit-oriented developments, which are often multifamily in nature or mixed-use developments. And over again, the planners in the audience said that they had adjusted their standards because so often the developers negotiated them down from those type of standards. And so many cities and municipalities had actually moved up those numbers with intentionality, knowing that they would be negotiated down to then get to where they actually wanted to be. And so some places were actually gaming that system in the city, understanding that gave the developers some flexibility, and these are shoulds, not shalls, and understanding that flexibility, but knowing that that negotiation may come back in various areas, but the open space was one that frequently came up. I agree, it does make it more expensive and can seem to impact density, but I would argue particularly in the nature of Farmers Branch being the city in a park, and that being an identity emblematic of our city and its very logo, that we would be doing these residents a disservice by not prioritizing the open space, because essentially we would be designing different city experiences for different residents based off the type of housing that they lived in at that time. And I myself am a renter here presently, but I would ask if anyone in the audience today has never rented. And if you could know, right? So we've all been a renter at some point, and I think the quality of life deserved by a renter is no less than that of a homeowner. And we know, especially from a physical and mental health standpoint, if this pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's the importance of biophilia and access to green spaces in order for us to be resilient and survive these types of stressful incidents. On top of that, from a sustainability perspective, I will add, in our area, we know we have significant issues with flooding and having less permeable or more permeable spaces that are green spaces as opposed to paved spaces is essential for reducing what will no doubt be increasing street floods, flash floods, which not only are expensive and damaging to our city, but potentially life-threatening. One small note on page 19, in the parking policy, it's at the very end of the page, just a small typo to note that it says parking to improve, and I believe the word there should be aesthetics on the screening. And I believe those are all the notes from my readings. So no specific questions, but wanted to be clear on my comments. Thank you for
Thank you very
excellent
much.
work.
Thank you.
Bonnie?
Yeah, I would like to echo the appreciation for the work and effort here. It has been a long time coming together. I also want to echo the sentiment about the attainable housing. I understand what you have said related to that, but I know that we've also seen a lot of multifamily built, and we know that these are kind of prime opportunities to offer large volumes of attainable housing. We can look at duplexes and accessory structures, but we're looking at helping one or two families in those instances versus, a percentage of these types of developments, and we've really missed that opportunity in all of the developments that we've seen over the last 5 years. And I would hate to see even 3 more come through the pipeline without having specific deliverables set forth to deliver to the developers to make sure that we start incorporating that as a priority immediately.
Amen.
So we have limited opportunities to do that too. I mean, eventually Farmers Branch will be built out much the way that the core of Farmers Branch has been already, but that's gonna happen in the east side and the west side, and we just won't have these opportunities, and people will be priced out of our community. I also have a quick question about the exterior building materials. Am I mistaken that we really don't have an opportunity to dictate?
You're correct. By state legislature, we have no authority to dictate building materials.
Okay, so these are all, the exterior building materials is, I mean, as long as they're at international code, we sort of have to, okay.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you just added to the discussion about the green spaces, and while I heard what Commissioner Zavala said and understand that sometimes the market drives it, I do appreciate that you have a different insight, and I recognize the value in the permeable nature of green space and the want and desire to give people a similar experience. So thanks for all of your comments. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Pat?
Well, again, I'll echo everybody. Thank you for this. This is really great. And Most everybody's kind of touched on the things that I was going to ask about. I think I do agree with the open space kind of setting a, let's hope, maybe it's not a shall, but let's get a minimum. And the pet thing, you're absolutely right. If it's multifamily, I don't know if there's a hygienic environmental study that's done or if there's standards in that, but if you've got a 300 unit multifamily development that is pet friendly, and you really don't have a lot of green space for them to go in, depending on where it's sited, it can be really, really nasty. So, again, I don't know if there's any science that's out there or anything that the planning, if there's standards to go by, but hopefully the 150 gets it.
Thank you. Kira, I do have a question. Did I read somewhere, either in your recap or in the policy, that we are saying no more multifamily on the west side?
That has been the current council's direction, was that there are, Shrupa, do you remember offhand the number of lots and multifamily units entitled on the
I
west side?
thought it was 9,000 is what I read somewhere.
I don't.
Yeah,
have the number on top of my
it
head.
may be around that seems high to me, but maybe around that number. But there are a number of lots that are, units that are not built yet, but
Right.
already entitled on the west side. So council's current direction is that they don't want to entitle a larger number of lots on the west side, at
And
least
is that
at
a part of
time.
this policy?
Not specifically,
Okay.
no. This policy wouldn't get into that direction, but the current council direction is that they would not like to see any more lots on the west side.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. I know this work is not easy work because you're trying to herd a lot of sheep. And so it'll be interesting, assuming this goes to council, where that all lands, because I know as a city, we've sort of been all over the place. But I generally like what I've read, and I really appreciate all the comments that the commissioners brought up. I will say on attainable housing, I hear some passion in the room, which is awesome. Sarupa, if you could make sure that the commission knows exactly the date when that's going before council, I would challenge all commissioners who feel deep in their heart about this to come and speak at a council meeting, because I have sat on some of these. I know when Bertle and I have been at other planning APA conferences, we've sat in attainable housing courses, and the planning community has a acronym like they have for everything, and it's called NIMBY, not in my backyard. And so oftentimes when the word attainable housing comes up, people automatically go to Section 8 apartments that are low income, which may or may not be what we mean when we say attainable housing. Is attainable housing affordable housing? Do we not already have a lot of affordable housing in the older parts of Farmers Branch? It just starts, just like the landscape ordinance, as you guys saw, turned into this large thing that felt like you couldn't get your hands around it. This attainable housing thing turns into the same thing. And I really think it would be helpful, rather than just having the 5 council members and the mayor have their opinions about it, we all have a voice. And so they may or may not watch this meeting and hear your voice, but if you go into a council meeting and you sign up to speak, they will hear your voice. And so if you really feel strongly about that, strong enough to go and speak at the council meeting, I would encourage that. And the second thing I would encourage is, I think we all have access to the last planning conference. I don't recall if there's courses in there on attainable housing. Would be shocked if there weren't. But I would really encourage that that we watch those and/or we bring that into study session, once that gets on our work plan, because that's going to be as difficult or more difficult than the landscaping policy, in my opinion, for this group and certainly for council, to figure out what is it that we really want. I mean, here, we're still saying, what is it that we really want? And we're talking about, open space and number of square feet per unit and those kind of things. And yes, that affects people's lives, but not exactly the same way as attainable / affordable housing does. And so anyway, I just wanted to put that plug in for that. I hope that we know when that meeting is, and I hope that we all show up to share our opinions on that. All right, that gets us through the regular meeting and leads us to item A2, discussion regarding the American Planning Association Cross-Chapter Collaboration APA C321 Conference.
David and I talked about it after the conference, that it would be a good item for us to do like a follow-up discussion. As you know, David, Linda, myself, Brian, we attended the.
Amber.
Oh, and Amber, sorry, I don't know why I forgot. We attended the full conference. This year, the format was unique. They allowed both in-person and virtual. The good thing about that is because we had registered for the full conference, every session that was recorded for virtual, we have access to those recordings, all of us, for 60 days, I believe. Right, Brian?
Yes.
So what I can do is, we can probably go through and call some of the sessions that we all felt very interesting and educational, and we can maybe make a list and have that available for you all to watch at your pace, at your time. And there might be some topics that we would like to bring back, just like we did in the last study session. I was actually able to get in touch with Doug McDonald, whose presentation I was showing you all about the Richardson IQ, and he's very open to talk about it more. He has even gone to other cities and talked about their project. I asked him about the funding, but of course at the conference we didn't have time. But I will bring those information back, and I would love to bring some of the presentation. For example, I attended the presentation that was New Urbanism in Texas or in Dallas-Fort Worth 20 years after. So they talked about South Lake Town Center, which South Lake was coming up, of course, when we were graduating from UT Arlington. And it has been, of course, more than 20 years now. And then they talked about this one I wasn't familiar with, but I do want to go and see after watching the presentation. It was in North Ridgeland Hills, help me with the name. It's a new, about 600 square feet or 600 acres mixed-use development, hometown. I don't know whether you all are familiar, but after I saw the presentation, I felt like I want to go and see. So in the panel discussion, both cities' planning directors were there and both master developers were there. Bill Gedema with Arcadia Realty, and then the other guy for the hometown development in North Richland Hills. And they talked about all these aspects of what makes a place a unique place, why people want to go and live there. What are those different type of housing solutions that these projects provide? And why is not just one solution fits all? They talked about public art, they talked about open space, they talked about trail connectivity. They even talked about how, it was so funny, the developer said, the way you know your neighborhood is successful is during Halloween, if you are sending your kids to another neighborhood or if other neighborhood kids are coming to your neighborhood. And that was so true though. They said that this hometown development, they said that they actually closed down the neighborhood streets for vehicles, and it's all pedestrian only. So it's a very common thing there for the homeowners to just sit outside with candies. It's not that like us, we just leave candy or you press the bell and we go out and give candy. There they actually make it into an event where kids walk around and that's the norm. So those are things, public art, we were talking about that how to fund public art, because that's the big sticker. Everyone says, well, how do we fund public art? But how public art can be made interesting and funded, they talked about this one simple tool. They said, this project has been so successful that every time a housing unit get resold, as part of the closing cost, they include like, I think their amount was like $300 or $400. They said it can be any amount, like $100, $200, who cares? For those homes, when they get resold, every time it's resold, that amount goes into that public arts fund. And it gets managed by a nonprofit, I'm sure, and they take care of the public art installation. So all this around the walkways, they have, they had all this bunch of pictures. It was really nice. They had this sculpture of Wendy with her dog, And they said that the community has a thing that the sculpture is supposed to be dressed up based on the event or the occasion. So like 4th of July, she would be dressed with like flag and stuff. And if it's like Cinco de Mayo, it would be a different kind of. And the sculpture actually had like ear holes for like little girls. They would put and do earrings on the sculpture. So how you can make public art as part of the community. And they have a board that reviews those plans. So we can review those sessions together in the study session. And David, I'd like for you to talk about the bus tour you guys went to.
Sure.
Because I know we do want the commissioners to, when we plan for the bus tour next year, to go and visit some of it.
Yeah, so Linda and I went on a bus tour of an area called Near South Side in Fort Worth. And they gave us one of these little booklets, which is almost like a real estate booklet, except it's not. But it shows the projects that are in process or on the books or finished. And I'll just pass this around so everyone can see it. But this is, I think they said, a 14,000 acre section of South Fort Worth that basically was like South Dallas, I'll say. It was not the vibrant part of the city, and it was low-income housing. But there's some beautiful sections of gorgeous, architecturally beautiful homes that are there. And so it's been under regentrification really the last, I'll say, 30 years. In 1995, a nonprofit called Near South Side was formed, and they're funded through a TIF. They actually control the TIF, and the TIF today is $1 billion. So they, what they fund is streets, roadways, sewer lines, as well as parks, art, et cetera. And so the city of Fort Worth, as they're redeveloping these old neighborhoods, the city of Fort Worth, 100% of that cost isn't on them to redo the street and sewer. The TIF may cover, let's say, half of it, which obviously makes it more appealing for the city of Fort Worth to say yes. They also work with the developer sort of as a pre-meeting. If you're going to go and develop in near the south side, you go meet with the nonprofit, and they have their design plans. It is a form-based code or multiple form-based codes, which is what our station area is. And they work with the developer to make sure that whatever project they're bringing to the area fits within the form-based code. Not to stifle the creativity of the developer. In fact, usually the developer, if they're off base, goes away and is excited about the project. So there's developers, we actually walked through a place on infill that's Detroit coming in. It's called PS 1200, and it's a multifamily that's a really cool design. You can Google ps1200.org and you can see the design. There's these arches. I can't remember how many units it is. It's a 4-story building. Very cool. Magnolia Avenue, they now call Restaurant Row in Fort Worth, and there's a ton of creative, independent restaurants there. I didn't really see any chains, or if they were not the big chains. They have, I want to say 3 theaters in the area, 4 or 5 marketing advertising agencies, so it's become a creative district there.
Most of the people that own the stores there, the businesses,
there.
live in the area. And it is the largest contiguous group of craftsman bungalows. I don't know if
Yeah.
it was the US or Texas, but it was pretty cool. And 30 years ago, they were being sold on the courthouse steps. And they were sold for nothing.
She said that the per square foot price, let's say 20 years ago, was $7. It's now $75. So it's 10 times greater than it was. But I recommended to Sarupa and Allison that this be where we take a bus tour, because this nonprofit group does a great job of presenting. The City of Fort Worth planning person was also there, and so they were able to throw in the nuts and bolts, if that's what you want to call it. And this area it's very comparable to multiple areas in Farmers Ranch. For example, Denton Drive, which we all are familiar with through our I-35 corridor study. We look at Denton Drive, and people talk about a road, changing it to where there's parking space and all those things. And if you've lived here a long time, you're scratching your head saying, that'll never happen. Or how's that going to happen? And if you go here, you'll actually see it happen. And in fact, we were on one street and we turned onto another street. One street is a 6-lane thoroughfare, kind of like Midway, lots of cars. And you turn on the next street, and they said this street 3 years ago was exactly that. It was 6 lanes. It's been on a road diet. There's pocket parking. It's now 4 lanes. There's a parkway in the middle with trees. Some of them probably live oaks. I think Linda pointed those out as we went. But and they do the traffic studies, and the amount of traffic that it's able to handle is exactly the same as the other street. And so you can actually see it on the ground just literally by turning the corner. On our east side, the east side plan, there's a lot of warehouses over there, and we kind of scratch our head and say, that would be great if those are bars and restaurants. And we see little green sprouts of that happening. If you go here, you're going to see they're just 10 years, 15 years ahead of where we are. So there's a lot of areas there that I think have application to different areas that we've talked about in our city that I think would help us be creative. Oftentimes, council members go with us on these tours, and so that would be great if council joins us. Sometimes staff comes along, maybe art and culture comes along. I don't know, but it's just a really cool area of town, and the way that it's developed and is still in development is the interesting part. Even though she said, a lot of people say, oh, well, Magnolia Street, it's done. And she said, from our perspective, there's still a lot of fill-in projects that need to happen there. And so.
The schools also, someone asked the question,
Yeah.
how are your schools here? And they said, actually what has happened is that urban are moving back in to that area to put their kids in the schools that are prime, and small. And so it's the community that has done this. The community people are the ones that have really come in, they've made the TIF, they're on they have boards and whatever. It was just so inspiring, and David and I kept saying, we can do this, we can do this.
She told a story about an elementary school that because of the neighborhood, I guess it was a very high crime area, at some point in the 50s, the school district built a school, but it was underground. It was literally a bunker. And so the students went down, there were no windows, but because it was underground, they were safe from that terrible neighborhood. And so as it started, developing and people wanted to have good public schools, it was time that there was mold, there was all kinds of issues with that. And the school district did whatever their design was, but the nonprofit got involved, and the city of Fort Worth got involved, and the citizens got involved, and they built a school that looks like the area from a facade standpoint. That's a cool urban kind of school that's above ground, that has windows, so on and so forth. And so it's a school that the community wanted. The school district was going to pay for it anyway. It didn't cost any more, and it actually fits into the area. And so there's just a lot of great stories like that that have happened there. They have a challenge because of the square foot price. They want to continue to attract entrepreneurs, startups, and artists, starving artists, but at $75 a square foot, that's a challenge. So they've worked to develop little 500 square feet retail, I call them incubators, where you can go and start your business, maybe get a cut on the rent, get up and going, and then once you're somewhat established, you can move to a larger space. And so they're trying to even address those kinds of needs. So it's just a really cool area that I think would be good for us to see.
Yeah, and next month, I hope all of you all can make the meeting next month. So far, we haven't seen that many cases shaping up. So it might be a good meeting for us to do a little bit of planning for next year, which is, I can probably get some dates out to you all to start looking at which dates might work. And I know Amber looked at a bunch of TOD projects, or maybe one that they took you guys to Grapevine, right?
We stopped at Grapevine, but we also talked about North Richland Hills.
Right.
So as we went through.
Because they are also doing another TOD project. So another project or another area I would like to also include as part of our tour, and maybe we do it like a half-a-day tour, is the Fort Worth one is of course gonna take a long time, including the drive time. So maybe do a half a day for Fort Worth and another day for looking at some TOD projects. I know Allison is working with the TOD Phase 2, so I want all of us to look at the best practices around and kind of compare that what all the cities around the Metroplex are doing around the dark stations and how their TOD projects are shaping up. So given all that, maybe next meeting would be a good time where we talk about the places, possible candidates. We have some ideas, we can add some more, and some look at some dates and kind of put that on our calendar. And maybe if you also want to give me some of the sessions that you felt were good, that we can maybe make a list to share with the group and maybe create a small snapshot of some of the really interesting ones and just have that go on the study
The
session.
plenary session too, we talked about freeways and how we work around those and stuff, that had
The
some,
walking, the guy.
yeah, it was excellent,
That was so
excellent.
exciting.
Yeah.
All right. A3, discuss agenda items for future planning and zoning commission consideration. Anything that?
Live oaks.
It's already part of the landscape plan.
Or like
I just have to say, I've got 3 live oaks that are given adequate space in their lovely trees. So it's not just.
no, this is for small areas.
Sure.
Yeah, they're beautiful
That's what I'm saying.
trees.
Yeah.
Specifically, what Linda kept pointing out is on the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the curb, you've got that little 3-foot section, and they'll plant a live oak there, and after 3 years, it's already overgrown that area.
Sure.
And so the choice is, it's either gonna die, or you're gonna have to cut it back, or because it's gonna get too
Right.
big for that area.
And many
So-
of them, in the little areas that they cut out like this and plant a tree, they're already dead. And so that's what I'm talking about, being, that they live and thrive, not just live for 3 years.
Sure, not like.
Not be a street tree type of thing. I mean, street trees don't live as long, but we've got other choices.
Sure.
Anything else? All right.
Suggestions.
We will adjourn at 6:52 PM.
When you said street tree, I'm picturing this poor tree wandering the streets alone, parent